Hey everybody! So today we're going to be talking about shallow rendering and how you can migrate away from shallow rendering to something else, because I'm going to be writing a newsletter blog post thing this morning, and I thought it'd be cool to be able to link to this to show people if they are convinced that shallow rendering is not helping them, then they know how to migrate away from it. So yeah, if you're not familiar with shallow rendering, then this might be helpful too. Okay, so we've got this component that we want to test. It's using React and CSS transition, and whoops, should not be using that. And then we've got this fade component, which we're using in our hidden message, and that's the main component that we're exporting here. We have state that we initialize to this object, or show is this.props initial show, or false. That's not provided. I guess we could do static default props initial show, spell it out right. I don't want to take a chance, false, and now we don't have to worry about that. Sweet. And then we have this toggle, which we use in our button that we render. You click on that and it'll toggle the show state of this hello world hidden message, and that hidden message is rendered inside of this fade, which is using the CSS transition. And yeah, and that is where we specify the class name and timeout and stuff. So the our interaction with the library is encapsulated in this fade component here. Cool, but that fade component is local to this file. We're not going to pull that out into another file because it's an implementation detail of the hidden message. There's no reason to extract it to its own file. So that's the way that this hidden message component works. So I've already got the finished versions here, so I'm just going to add a shallow example.js, and this is where we're going to write that. I'm actually going to, there's a lot of boilerplate here that I'm just going to copy and we'll get rid of all stuff. Yeah, cool. So we've got our test all ready to go. Let's go ahead and npm run test watch. Oh, you need to go. That extra dash dash is to say, hey npm, this isn't a flag for you, this is a flag for the script that you're going to be running. So I'm going to hit the P key to filter to shallow example. We're just running that one shallow example. Now with Enzyme, normally in your project you'll probably have this in a setup file somewhere, so you don't have to do this in every file, but I'm not going to do that today. But we're configuring an adapter for React 16, and then we're using shallow here, and we have our hidden message from that hidden message component. So I'm going to get a wrapper from shallow of the hidden message. We're going to say initial show is true. And then I'm going to console log wrapper.debug. Cool. So now I'm going to find that button for find button and simulate a click. And then we'll do another wrapper debug. And so before fade in is true, and then after fade in is false. Perfect. Like right there, I should mention that like lots of the docs, Enzyme docs, would suggest that instead of simulating a click on the button, you would actually get the wrapper instance, and then like what is it? This method called toggle, and just call it toggle. And you do it that way instead, and that doesn't even work. I think you have to do wrapper.update. Yep, there you go. So yeah, poo-poo on that. But like if you're doing stuff like this, then don't do that. That's an implementation detail. Who cares if the wrapper or if the hidden message has a method on it called toggle? The user doesn't care. What the user cares about is when they click on the button, it's going to toggle the state. So and not only toggle the state, because yeah, lots of the docs would also recommend that after you've updated, or after you've called that instance method, you're going to say expect wrapper.state to equal show as false. And that passes, and that's great. And you verify that toggle swaps the state, but you have no way of verifying that the button actually is wired up to that toggle. The user doesn't care about the internal state of the component, so your test shouldn't either. But anyway, I've seen enzyme docs and comments in enzyme, the issue tracker, that would suggest this is how you would test this component. Don't do that. Definitely don't do that. But yeah, we're talking about something else you shouldn't do. So we're gonna click on the button simulated, click on it, and now we need to get that fade and verify that the in prop is set properly. So we're going to wrapper.find fade and props, and we'll console.log that just to make sure we're in a good state here. And sweet, we've got in and then children. So for us, we're gonna change this to expect wrapper find fade dot props to equal in is false and children is expect dot any object. I'm not gonna make any assertions about that. I guess we could say div hello world. I think that would probably work. Yeah, that works. So that's cool. Yeah. So that is one way, and actually we'd probably want to make an assertion that it's rendered correctly in the first place. So it needs to be true. And then save that, and we're all set, right? So this is shallow rendering, and let me show you one reason why this is not awesome. Let me go back to my hidden message. Well, this isn't really about shallow rendering. This is more about the find API that I really don't like. So let's change this. I'm in here. Now I'm going to import a fade component, or I have some reason that I want to change what this is called. Maybe instead of fading, it's going to like zoom in from the left. So we're going to call this appear and rename that to appear. And oh no, my test is busted. What? Why is my test busted? The user doesn't care what this is doing, so why does my test care? The user doesn't care what this thing's called, but my test does, and so that's really frustrating to me. So I don't like that. What on earth? I'm hitting the U key, and it keeps. That's weird. Okay, so we'll do fade. Oh, fade. Okay, so we're not going to rename it, right? We could refactor our test, and it'd be pretty quick and easy to update. But let's do another thing. What if instead of in, I'm going to actually pull off a prop that's fade in, and then we'll say in is fade in, and then we'll rename this to fade in. Okay, cool. So the component should still work, right? Like that's totally legit. Oh no! My thing's busted because my props were renamed, and this internal implementation detail is leaking out to my test. And so now I'm testing implementation detail as well. That's kind of, so that's another thing I don't like about this. That's not specifically shallow rendering either. That's just the testing implementation details as encouraged by the testing framework. So, and specifically getting the props on the fade component, which is an implementation detail of the hidden message. So another one last whammy here is what if somebody comes in and they add a new prop, props dot mistake. I don't know what the prop would be called, but then they return null. The test still passes, but the application is totally busted. So we'll see what this looks like later when we swap over to something else entirely. So I got a couple of comments and questions. Let me just check those out before we move over to mocking and mounting. Okay, So I was thinking about this earlier. We use shallow rendering to test business logic in components, but maybe that logic shouldn't live in the components. Yeah, that's true. So if you have some complex business logic in a component, then perhaps you could extract that to a utilities file, and then your component just call into that. Like you still have lifecycle methods and stuff. You want to make sure that somebody doesn't typo those, or that those are wired up correctly. So extracting them is not a bad thing necessarily, but you still want to have confidence that those things are wired up correctly, and the only way to really do that is to click on the buttons and assert on the rendered output. What's the difference between shallow and mount? Shallow, that's kind of a big subject, that like there are lots and lots of blog posts about that, so you'd probably just Google that. Yeah, so shallow does not actually mount the component, so like your lifecycle methods won't run, except for like your constructor, and the deprecated component will mount. I think that runs. I'm not sure. I don't use shallow rendering. But yeah, so not all your lifecycle methods will run, and your the biggest thing is that your composite components won't actually all render. So for example, we'll say console log wrapper.debug. You'll notice that fade is being shown here, but fade isn't actually rendering the div, it's rendering CSS transition. So what it does is it says, oh, I found a composite component here, and so I'm not going to actually mount that thing or try to render it or anything. I'm just going to show that it's being rendered and show that its children is this thing. So it just shows the props basically, because here it's showing fade and is false, and children is just another prop. So it's just showing the props that you're passing to these components. So that's all that shallow render does. Mount will actually render it just like it would in your normal application. It's a good thing. Will there be a video after streaming? Yes. Deleting half of my test suite. So components shouldn't have business logic? Not necessarily. I actually don't care too much. Lots of people suggest don't put business logic in components because lots of times it's because it's hard to test or it's hard to share that code. I disagree that it's hard to test. I think with the utilities that we have now, it's not hard to test necessarily, but as far as not being able to share it, if you're using the right patterns, then you can share it, and in really nice ways. But there are definitely situations where it's a little harder to share certain things, I guess. But I think the composability of React components is really powerful. So I load my components up with business logic a lot of the time. But yeah, either way. Oh, it's Nitin Tilswani, one of my favorite people in the world. And he says he's using it in emotion primitives and native. Yeah, so the world is a little bit different with React Native, and I haven't done a whole lot of testing myself there, but I would suggest that it probably is better to not use shallow rendering for those same reasons. So anyway, getting back to things in review, the reason that I don't like shallow rendering for this particular case is there are implementation details where it's not rendering the specific component that I'm actually rendering, and so I don't get a clear picture of whether things are wired up together properly. Like I could change this to like have a typo and my test still pass, and I have no way with shallow rendering to verify that I'm actually using CSS transition properly. What you'd have to do is you'd extract this to another file and unit test that thing, or you'd just export this thing for testing purposes only, and then unit test this thing to make sure that it's using CSS transition properly. Another thing you could do is just take this and inline it directly here, but I broke up the component because I wanted to encapsulate this logic here, or those defaults, and I didn't want those to live inside a hidden message, and my test shouldn't drive the way that I write my components necessarily. Like I think that's actually a better design decision, so my test should enable that. So let's go ahead and see what a mock version of shallow of this would be. So we're going to make mock example.js, and we'll run mock example. And I'm gonna just pull in a couple of things, and whoa, no looky. Yeah, don't look. Okay, cool. So here's what we got to do, and actually I'm gonna change this a little bit. Import React thing library after each, so I can get rid of this thing and get rid of that. Okay, so with React testing library, due to the way that React works with event delegation being tied to the document, when we render, we actually take the div that we've rendered your component to and stick it into document.body. And so that way all the event delegation stuff works. So when you fire events and things, it bubbles up and whatever. And so React can respond to it. And so because of that, after every test, we want to clean up the document so that it doesn't have a bunch of divs hanging around. And so that's what this first line is for. In React 17, hopefully, the event delegation will be completely rewritten. And maybe even potentially removed, because event delegation might not, like Preact doesn't do it, and it's pretty fast. So yeah, anyway, when that happens, when it either needs to be removed or it needs to be relative to the node that you're rendering to. And so once that happens, then you won't need to do this cleanup after each. It'll just garbage collection will fix it up. But anyway, until then, you have that one line that you'd put in a setup file or something. And then here we're going to import our CSS transition. We'll use that here in a little bit. And then we're importing render and fire event, so we can fire some events and hidden message for our thing that we're going to test. So let's render our hidden message with initial show is true. And then I'm going to want to get the toggle. So I'm going to get by text. Get by text. And we'll say toggle button get by text toggle. And then I'm going to click on that. So I'm going to fire event, click, toggle button. And here, let's actually pull out debug here and call it. And requested. Oh, whoops, that get by text, capital T for toggle. I could use a regex too if I didn't want to make that. Okay, cannot read property exit of undefined. That's coming from CSS transition group. So with shallow rendering, remember, it doesn't actually render anything. Just it calls in to get all the props for all the components that you're rendering from your root level component, but it doesn't go any deeper than that. With the render from React testing library, not enzyme, you're going to be actually mounting the component, running all the lifecycle hooks exactly like it would in a real browser. But yeah, so we're rendering this hidden message, and that ultimately is going to be rendering the CSS transition. And I'm not actually sure why this is happening. Potentially something that's not supported in JS DOM, maybe. I'm not sure. But in any case, we don't want it to be rendered anyway, because CSS transition is going to take 1,000 milliseconds before the transition is complete. We don't want our test to have to wait for that. So we want to mock out CSS transition. So what we're going to do is I'm going to use jest.mock React, or what is it? React transition group. And with this, it's now going to be giving me a mocked out version of that module's exports. And we want to be specific about what we're exporting here. And actually, I should show, if you want to learn more about mocking, but really, what is a JavaScript mock? I've got a blog post for this, and you can learn more about what it is that we're doing here step by step. But yeah, so now we're going to module, or not module, but return the component that we're using in our test. So CSS transition, or sorry, the component we're using in our implementation, CSS transition. And here we're going to, I'm going to simulate the same thing that we would have, or a similar thing that we would have with shallow rendering. So we'll say Jest function to keep track of how many times this is called. This is just going to be a React component that's a function component. And it's going to take props, and we'll destructure off the children. And then we'll render the children. So we'll just return the children. Cool. Okay, so I saved that. And now this is what I have. So the debug is going to log everything that our queries are selecting on. And due to making it easier to support portals, that actually is the entire document, which is probably a good thing. So you can see if you're leaking stuff into the document. But in any case, we have our body, and then this is our div container. And then this div is where our actual component starts. So we have a button, and we have hello world. And you'll notice that this is different from Enzyme's debug, because Enzyme will show you the props and things, and this is not showing you the props. It's just showing you the elements. And maybe having the props during debug would be helpful, and if somebody wants to work on that, they can. I'm not so concerned about it personally. I kind of like just seeing what would be rendered, but yeah, it might be nice to see like event handlers and stuff for our debug thing. So let's see, we've got we've clicked on the toggle button, and it's showing our hello world, and that's because our logic for whether or not it should show doesn't exist. So this is the same thing we had with our shallow. When we debugged, it would always show the hello world, because the thing responsible for that logic is this CSS transition. So one thing that we could do is we could also pull out the in prop. We'd say in children, otherwise null. And now we run this again. Oh, reserved word, boo. Show. We'll just rename that to show. There we go. And now it's not showing the message. So that's just like, that's general, just making our mock more resemble our the thing that we're mocking better. And yeah, I'm gonna leave it that way. I don't have that way in my finished version, but I'm gonna leave it that way because we can actually do some a couple more assertions there. Sort of. Yeah, making your mock resemble the thing that it's mocking as closely as possible is a good thing. The problem is when you basically rewrite the entire module in your mock, then you're like, yeah, but we're not doing that. What we're really trying to mock away is the logic of timing and transitioning and stuff. And so that's exactly what we're doing. So we're resembling the thing we're mocking, and we're getting rid of the timing problems. Okay, sweet. So we've got this fire event click. We probably want to do an assertion here to make sure that it's rendered properly. So we've got another thing in here called get by, well, actually, no, we're going to use get by text again. And we'll expect get by text hello world not to null, or actually I think we got an assertion for not. Yeah. So we don't want it to be null when we first start out, and then we can expect it to be null when after we click on it. But this is going to fail because get by text actually throws an error and logs like what the state of the DOM is if it can't find what you're looking for. So what we could do is we can do a query by text, and that will return null. Sweet. Nice. Okay, so a couple of things. Like actually, let me just show you this. This kind of skipped ahead to the final version of what I wanted. So I'm just going to show you what the actual shallow compared version would look like. So here we're just mocking and it's rendering children just like shallow would, except it never even gets to this point. But I digress. So we're getting my text, and then what we're going to do is, because this CSS transition is a Jest function, it's a mock function, then we can make assertions on it. And so that's why we import it from React Test transition group. This CSS transition is actually this Jest function, kind of handy. And then we can expect the CSS transition is called with the correct props. And here, let's actually go to that one, mock.js. And now this is what's neat is even though our test is in some ways similar to our shallow, where it's asserting on props, it will actually fail if we change the name of a prop, like if we typo timeout, for example, then that test can fail. Or if we say if props.someMistake return null, that will not fail. What? Am I running the right? I tested this beforehand and this should fully be failed. Oh, right, sorry. Some mistake here. Not some mistake. There we go. Cool. And so CSS transition isn't even called. It's not being rendered. And so we get that. But if I have this same mistake and my shallow sample, then that test continues to pass. And so which one of these is giving me more confidence that my code works? I think that is pretty clear to me. That it's not using shallow rendering is a good good case here. Let's see, what else do we got? I feel like there was something else I wanted to show. Oh yeah, so here in my original mock, I would just assert on what CSS transition was called with. And that's probably a good assertion that I should probably have in this example as well, because at this point, this is actually testing my mock, which hopefully is the same as the actual implementation. But it might be nice to assert that I'm also calling it with the right timeout here and the right class name. And so having the mock here, which it has those default props and things, would probably be good. And yeah, so one other thing is the CSS transition is being rendered like a component, react.createElement CSS transition. And so that function is going to be called with 2 arguments. And so that's why I had this context second argument here. That's kind of unfortunate. I wish that I didn't have to provide that second argument because I don't care about that second argument. But I've got it here. So here, what I'm going to do, I'm going to combine this, and this will be the ultimate test that I'm really looking for. We'll paste that here. I no longer need the event. We're going to put this one down here. And we'll put this, yeah, that's where it is. We'll put this here. Write some of these things out. Wait, where's that click? There it is. That needs to be. Oh, wait, no. Right there. And we'll. Okay, cool. So what we're doing here is we get the toggle button, and then we initialize some variables here. And we have our assertion that CSS transition is being used properly by passing in, and then the rest of these children, timeout, etc., etc. And then we're also verifying that our mock resembles the thing that it's mocking by verifying get by text hello world is not null. So our mock is using show to render the children. So that's an extra piece of, like, it's not super duper useful, but it's a little bit useful. It's useful enough to have it there anyway. And then we're going to clear our CSS transition and then click on toggle button, which will cause a re-render. No need to do wrapper.update nonsense. And then we're going to query by text because it won't exist there, and we'll expect that to be null. And then we'll expect CSS transition to have been called with the right props. Now in is false rather than true. And yeah, and you can do more things to your implementation. You can the things that, like, okay, so here's the thing that you've all been waiting for, like my big summary of why I don't like shallow rendering at all, and I'd much rather use just mocking for when I want to unit test a component. And here it is. With shallow rendering, I can do things to my implementation that are implementation details, and those will break my tests. With shallow rendering, I can do things that will break my application, and those things won't break my tests. That's pretty much it. And then with just mocking, if I want to actually unit test a component, I just use regular just mocking to mock components. and when I'm and I do a full mount, and when I do that, I can change things to my implementation, like rename fade to anything else, or yeah, or I could rename the state, or just refactorings that continue to have it operate in the same way it always was. So I can change things about my implementation, and my tests will continue to pass, so long as I didn't break anything. And then if I do things that would break my application, my tests also break. And so that's the biggest reason why I really don't like shallow rendering. I much prefer, if you really need to not render something, then don't use shallow rendering. Use Jest mocking, because literally this is super easy. And if you're using CSS transition throughout your application, you don't want to have this file everywhere, then we can create a mocks directory. So we'll do mocks. Oh, that is not a directory. Boo. So mocks, and then it's the name of the module, React transition group. And actually, now I think about it, I think it has to be at the root directory here. Oh, and this needs to be .js. And then I'm going to take this, and we'll go up here, and module.exports equals that thing. And instead of providing a mock factory function, I'm just going to not provide it, and Jest will now automatically look it up in that mocks directory. So yeah, so you write a mock for the module that you don't want to actually render just once, and then you can use it all over the place. And fun fact, it actually happens by default for Node modules, so you don't even need to provide the mocks thing. And then you can disable that with jest.don't mock, or I think it's don't mock. It might be unmock. Can't remember the difference. Don't indicates the module system should never return a mock version, or unmock. I think those may be aliases of each other, but yeah, so you can disable that for a particular test. But in any case, I don't have to do anything special other than create this one thing, and my mock is explicit rather than this implicit, I just don't render anything, and now I can refactor my implementation, and my code break, and my application's still working, but my test breaks, and so now I have to update my test, and now I hate testing. Or I can break my application, and my test says I'm still good to go. Now your tests are worse than having no tests at all, because it's lulled you into a false sense of security of thinking that you actually are are all set, but you're not. And so you don't care to write more tests because you think that you're already confident, but it's totally false. I mean, I'm not suggesting that shallow rendering, if you really want to shallow render, you're probably better off than not having any tests at all. But it does, there is that false sense of security, because you can break things you can do things that will break your application, but not your tests, and that's just super annoying to me. Okay, so I think I've got a couple questions. Yeah, so Nitin, you're awesome. So there actually is a way to use React testing library, React native. There's an issue somewhere. I think it was one of the earlier issues. React native. Yeah. So here, I'm not sure where that ended up. Yeah. So there's still a little bit of work to do. Somebody had a kind of a mock thing. There's a React Native mock render. And so yeah, you might look into that. But I think using React testing library or something like it for testing React Native would be sweet to get away from some of these problems of shallow rendering, for one. Okay, another question: why are streams on why some streams are via Twitch and some via YouTube? I used to do a lot with Twitch. Now I don't. Now I'm pretty much just YouTube, because with Twitch, after 2 weeks the recording goes away and it's gone forever. With YouTube, it just automatically stays on YouTube, so I kind of like that better. What about using a headless browser? So that's great too. It's kind of a big subject outside of this, but what I actually recommend people do is use Cypress.io. It's an amazing tool, and if you're going to use Cypress.io, there is a new plugin that I strongly suggest you take advantage of called Cypress Testing Library, which is similar to React Testing Library, and it's awesome. So yeah, give Cypress a look. It's solid. Okay, that's pretty much it for me. This was a long one, but hopefully that correlates to more valuable info. Now I feel like I need to turn this into a blog post and send that out to my newsletter, and I'll try to get that done today. If I can't, then maybe I'll send a shorter one and I'll do it next week or something. But hopefully this was helpful and helped people understand my perspective on shallow rendering. And yeah, I think you're all great. I hope you have a nice day. Bye.